Well, thank you everyone for being here. We're going to be brief in deference to your warmth and well-being. I'm really proud to stand here today after the United States Senate Saturday morning passed one of the most important, a monumental, truly a monumental step forward to conquer the pandemic and revive our economy. It was monumental because it is monumental because it reflects our listening to the people of New Haven and Connecticut. It reflects our listening to the people of Connecticut and the country that we need to turn around the pandemic to end the economic crisis. This major life-saving measure will put shots in the arms of people. It will put children back to school safely, and it will put money in people's pockets. It will create a roaring economy with consumer spending being the engine that powers our economic recovery. And that consumer spending depends on people feeling safe and secure to go back into restaurants and retail places and all of the venues that are vital to reviving the economy. What is most important here is that everybody in America is going to have access to a vaccine by the end of May. More manufacturing and delivery of vaccines are essential to conquering this virus and its variants and making sure that everybody is safe, because no one is safe until everybody is safe. And I'm very proud that we worked together as Democrats. We reached out to Republicans. We sought to make it bipartisan. At the end of the day, they rejected that constructive invitation. And we did it because we remained unified. We still need to reform the filibuster, end it. But right now, we are proud that a Democratic majority delivered to America, made help a reality, not just a rhetorical promise. What it will mean to the people of Connecticut is vaccines in your arms, children back into our schools safely, money in people's pockets so they can go to the restaurants and retail shops. It will mean a child tax credit, a revolutionary change in policy, so that every family virtually in Connecticut will receive $300 a month for every child, lifting half or more of all children now in poverty out of that state. That is not just monumental, it is revolutionary to end poverty for that many children and their families. And it will also extend child care, nutrition assistance, rental aid, family-directed policies that will not only end the public health crisis, it will help restore economic security for millions and millions of Americans. For state and local governments like New Haven, $4 billion out of the $350 billion are coming to Connecticut. That $4 billion means $2.7 billion for the state and $1.6 billion for cities and towns like New Haven. In fact, $94.7 million for New Haven. Almost $100 million for Hartford. Similar amounts for major cities and every town in Connecticut. a fiscal boost that will enable our state and cities to keep police and firefighters and emergency responders on their payrolls and deliver services to their people. It is life-saving, truly, not just in an economic or fiscal sense, but in a real-life human sense. And so I couldn't be prouder of this measure. It represents an approach that is very different from the Republican, the top-down tax cut of nearly $2 trillion. We're doing a bottom-up rescue plan for about $2 trillion. And this measure relies on the people of Connecticut and the country being healthier and safer, driving this economy forward out of recession. The lesson from past economic crises is go big, do it now. That's what we did. Go big, do it now. Time is not on our side. In fact, we are making up for lost time, squandered by the past administration, resulting in 525,000 Americans losing their lives. Go big, go bold, do it now. That's what we have done, and it will mean billions of dollars to Connecticut and a rescue plan that will relieve poverty and drive the economy forward, rather than the timid and overly small approach in past economic recoveries. So we remain unified. We listen to the people of Connecticut. I'm proud to be here today with the mayor of New Haven and my colleague, Senator Murphy. I'm going to turn it over to him
now. Well, thank you very much, Dick. Mr. Mayor, thank you for having us back again today. Listen, this is one of the most important things that I've been a part of in my entire career in public service. This measure is going to save Connecticut's economy. It is going to power our country back to near full employment. It's going to save literally thousands of businesses right here in the greater New Haven area, and it's going to lift half of the kids living in poverty in the neighborhoods that surround City Hall out of poverty. That's extraordinary. One piece of legislation could do that. Listen, this economy was hurting. American families were hurting before the pandemic. What the pandemic did was bring the entire economy to a halt, but also expose how fragile America's economic life was for so many people. You know, over half the country had no savings, so that when they lost their job, when they were very quickly and unexpectedly out of work, they had no savings to draw on in order to put food on the table, in order to keep making tuition payments, in order to pay for their medication. What this bill does is not only inject money directly into the recovery, but try to make up for what has been over the past 20 years a growing inequality of the haves and have-nots. So as Dick mentioned, well, you know, this bill has direct aid for cities and towns. It also has an expansion of the child tax credit. And while we're here in New Haven, I just want to thank Rosa DeLauro for dedicating her career to expanding the child tax credit. She has been pushing and pushing and pushing on this issue, knowing what a difference it would make for kids here in New Haven. And she, more than almost anybody else, deserves credit for that transformational piece of policy being in this bill. But we're here today to primarily talk about what it means for the state and cities. New Haven gets about $100 million in direct city assistance, but there are other pots of money that are going to end up in New Haven as well. So there's about $130 billion in education assistance in this bill, and a big chunk of that money will end up in New Haven public schools. The idea is when school starts again in the fall, we hope it looks like normal school, but we're going to need to surge support services around kids, especially kids with learning needs. The funding in this bill allows us to do that. There's rental assistance in this bill. So there's going to be thousands of families here in New Haven that have been struggling to pay their rent, landlords who frankly have been struggling to pay their mortgage payments, who are now going to see an influx of funding. That's going to matter here in New Haven. And then there's additional FEMA dollars, so as to make sure that every single expense that Mayor Elicker is incurring to deal with the emergency of the pandemic is reimbursed. And we expand out the number of things that New Haven can apply to FEMA for in order to get full reimbursement. So it's an extraordinary piece of legislation, and I think the most important thing that Dick said that I'll just underscore before turning it over to the mayor is this. Listen, we have a philosophy that if you put money into the foundation of the economy, into the pockets of poor people and middle-class families, that everybody will do better. That's the theory of this bill, is that if we put money into poor families and middle-class families, that they will then go out and spend that money in the retail establishments, in the restaurants of New Haven, and that will then lift all boats. I think that's what's going to happen in the coming weeks and months, and I'm really proud to have been a part of an effort that builds this economy from the bottom up. So with that, to talk about how this impacts New Haven, let me introduce my friend Justin Elicker.
Thank you, Senator Murphy, Senator Blumenthal, and Rosa DeLauro vicariously through Alexa. This is a big deal for our city. And when you think about, we're in March now, and March marks the anniversary where we were closing down everything, right? We were closing down schools, we were closing down businesses, we were frantically setting up testing sites around the city. And I am so proud of the work that we have done over this past year as a community to come together, and in particular to focus on equity and ensuring that communities that have historically been underserved have the kind of resources and support that is needed to get through this time. And this bill does that in such a larger scale. And thinking back to last year and the national leadership that we had compared to what we have now, and the investment and importance of, in particular, communities that are struggling, we're so grateful for that support. The funding will help us recover dramatically as a community, and we're having conversations about how we will go about considering how to spend this funding. And I want to cover just a couple of things that I think are important to note. First of all, the city's in a financial crisis, and the funding will assist that, but it will not solve that problem. And I think that's very important given the ongoing conversations that we're facing as a city to underscore. For example, it doesn't cover pension, debt service, salary increases for employees, and a lot of the systemic problems that are long-term. And so we need to continue to work as a community and with the state and our partners to ensure that those systemic issues are addressed. What it will help is on the economic recovery side. So many of our businesses are struggling. Our schools desperately need the kind of support, social services that help our children have access to the resources that they need. And in addition, we want to use this as an opportunity to think big and long-term about how we invest in our communities. I think that you can anticipate investment in fiber around the city to make sure that internet access is improved, investment in our small business communities. We are planning on having conversations with our Board of Alders and our community and working together to determine how to best ensure that this funding has a long-term significant impact on our community. Again, very grateful for your support. It is so cold, so I'm going to hand it over to Alexa to make a comment. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Alexis Brown, and I am here today on behalf of Congresswoman DeLauro, and I will read her remarks. Good morning, everyone. While I would be delighted to be with Senator Murphy, Senator Blumenthal, Mayor Elicker, and all of you in New Haven to discuss the critically important American Rescue Plan, I'm needed in Washington, D.C. today to vote. We continue to find ourselves in the midst of a public health and economic crisis brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. As lawmakers, we cannot control every adverse circumstance our nation must face, but we can choose how we respond to them. This plan will provide vital support for American working families, women, and children. People are on the edge after a year. These $1,400 per person payments allow people to deal with built-up debt, pay rent, buy food, and pay health care bills. Also, critically important is a historic increase in the child tax credit from $2,000 to $3,000 for children 6 to 17, with an additional $600 for each child under 6. Think of that. It's a new lifeline to the middle class and cuts child poverty in half. Specifically, it would cut Black child poverty by 52.4%, Hispanic child poverty by 45.4%, AAPI child poverty by 37%, white child poverty by 38.6%, Native American child poverty by 61.5%, and multiracial and other groups by 38.7%. As the Biden-Harris administration said from day one, this is not only relief Americans will see. We continue to look to future relief packages as we turn to the next recovery plan, where I will fight to ensure we build the infrastructure for the future, including passing permanent paid family and medical leave and permanently expanding and improving the child tax credit. The time to make a bold investment in the health and security of American people is now. We cannot afford another mistake in our response to the challenging circumstances which we live through. On Tuesday, I will vote on the American Rescue Plan, and all of you in mind, with the determination that this is only the beginning of our effort to adequately meet this moment with strength, with action, and with hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, that 100 million or 94 million to New Haven. So you said that does not include the education money. So will this mean no tax increase this year?
The short answer is no. It doesn't mean that. And as you know, I've presented 2 budgets to the Board of Alders. One is the crisis budget that includes a tax increase and major cuts because of the systemic financial problems. The other is the Forward Together budget that presumes that we get additional funding from the state and Yale University. In addition to that budget that we're considering for fiscal year 22, we have around a $13-14 million deficit in this existing year. The $13 to $14 million deficit, a lot of that can be potentially helped by this because of revenue losses, which this covers. It potentially could help cover some police overtime, which is every city around the nation is seeing a significant increase in violent crime. And so it is clear that that is COVID driven. So we believe that can help cover those costs. In next year's budget, related to your specific question, the primary issues are a $25 million pension increase, debt service increase, contractually obligated salary increases. None of those things are covered by this. It helps in many ways and can reduce that gap, but we need pilot reform at the state level to pass. This is a one-time thing, and it is intended for the economic revitalization of the city, not to plug. What's that?
How much of the 94 million will reduce what you?
We're making an assessment right now. This thing hasn't even passed Congress right now. And I can say that historically, when we submit things to FEMA, oftentimes many things are rejected. My understanding is that there's a component of this that it's done in a different way. So we don't anticipate it being a significant amount that will address our budget problems, but it will be very helpful.
What is the 94 million? Because it didn't include FEMA, according to Senator.
It is reimbursed. So my understanding, they can also add to this, but it is reimbursement for revenue that may have been lost. In the city of New Haven, our primary driver is parking, meter, and tag revenue that we have lost, and that amount of money, you're talking about around $3 million.
So what's the 94 million?
It's economic stimulus. You can. So this is things like assistance with housing, assistance with small businesses, investing. We're assessing this now, but investing in a lot of our major corridors to inject additional support to revitalize, in particular, small businesses. Correct.
What about like the filters in the schools? Are we ever change the air filters in the schools now? Or?
I mean, those things. So, those things would be covered by this, is our assessment. Yeah.
Justin, let me just jump in for a second. So a lot of the allowable expenses for this funding will be determined by the Treasury Department. And so let me say, my goal is to allow the maximum amount of flexibility to both the state government and to city governments in spending this money. So I think it is a little too early to know exactly what costs this will be able to cover at the local level. But as Mayor Elicker said, there's also going to be a decision at the state level about how they're going to allocate their emergency dollars. And so there could be additional relief coming to certain cities depending on the way that the state spends their dollars. And even with the education dollars, there is generally a requirement on the education dollars that they supplement existing programs, but there is some flexibility built in for teacher retention. So I think the mayor's right that it likely will not cover the entire deficit for certain cities, but depending on how the money is, how the regulations around the expenditure of the money are determined by Treasury, it could provide some additional relief. So I think the sort of short story is probably a little too early to know.
But I think it's very important to add, and I spoke to the governor about this issue yesterday. Just as we were united in the Senate to make sure that there is maximum money and flexibility in the $350 billion going to the country as a whole, I think the state is going to be united behind the cities and towns of Connecticut. And the $2.7 billion going to Connecticut will help with the 2-year deficit of $2 billion that is projected. But it will also leave money that can be provided to the towns and cities to help them. New Haven is probably the largest recipient of this allocation in the state. They're all approximately $100 million. But in addition, there's money that goes to schools, $160 billion. There's money for vaccine production and delivery, which will help with the clinics that New Haven has. There is money for the restaurants, specific program for restaurants that will enable them to reopen, which will increase revenues coming to local and state governments, as the mayor said. The hope is that conquering the pandemic means reopening the economy and revitalizing the revenues for state and local governments around the country, including the big cities, but also towns and localities that may be smaller and in need of this revenue too. And I want to just come back to the point that we've made. Rosa DeLauro has fought for years for this child tax credit expansion, and it puts us on a path to really revitalizing the American dream for countless children who right now in New Haven may be at risk of losing it. It is monumental in that sense, and it goes beyond one fiscal year or two. It's really a lifetime change.
Are there any lessons in this bill about the challenges and the opportunities going forward, about the politics of the Senate right now? You have no Republican votes. You have moderate Democrats who exerted some pressure and forced some changes. So is there any political lessons here?
The political lesson is that we need to be unified, and we will accomplish great things if we remain unified as a Democratic caucus and majority. The real lesson here is America is going to judge this Congress by results, not rhetoric. It will judge us by how well we do in reviving the economy and conquering the pandemic. We know that we're going to be judged by results. But our hope is that we will tremendously modify, if not end, the filibuster. And that is ultimately a significant possible path forward.